Francis Trevelyan Buckland was not the first naturalist who dined on specimens. That was Georges Louis Leclerc. Francis' father, Reverend William Buckland, the English geologist, performed similar inquiries, which led him to consume He claimed to have eaten a portion of the embalmed heart of Louis XIV. The taste was not to his liking, but it was not the worst thing he had ever tried. He gave that distinction to a mole. Then he changed his mind and said that the worst thing he had ever eaten was a very large fly. Riding in a coach near Dorsetshire, Reverend Buckland encountered a young woman. He noticed that they were both reading Georges Cuvier's volume on fossils. She was Mary Morland, and had contributed illustrations to the book. They were wed in early 1826. Their son, Francis Trevelyan Buckland, was born on December 17th. Along with a gift for observation, Francis would also inherit his father's inquisitive palate. On a tour of Europe, Francis and his father visited St. Christina's Church in Bolsena, Italy. It was said to be the site of a 13th century miracle. A visiting Bohemian priest, who doubted the divine mystery of the Eucharist, witnessed the host transformed into bleeding flesh in his hands. Fresh blood spots were said to appear upon the marble where the priest had stood. Reverend William Buckland knelt down and licked the spots.
I can tell you what it is. It is a bat's urine.
Francis was sent away to school at the age of 8, and 2 years later was transferred to a school in Laleham, England. There, Francis was beaten terribly by a brutal headmaster, his own uncle, John Buckland. Francis bore a scar on his hand until the end of his life. It was here that Francis gained the view that all of the animal world is equal, from human to sea slug. At 12, he left for a school that specialized in training boys for Oxford, where he was well liked. During this period, Francis spent much of his time trapping animals. He had a tremendous love for fishing. He also became a skilled poacher. He would keep some of the catches, and this is how he began to collect pets, including he was the first of 9 children. 4 died in infancy. In 1844, his brother Adam died at the age of 6. The Reverend took the family to Lyme on holiday to take their minds off the death. They collected fossils of long-ago creatures that had passed through life into stone. Directly after this, Francis entered Corpus Christi College at Oxford. He kept a small menagerie in his dormitory. He also kept a baby bear that he often dressed in a cap and gown. Richard Owen, a founder of the British Museum of Natural History, had become friends with Reverend William Buckland while trying to determine how the pearly nautilus, the last of a long lineage that had once ruled the seas, rose and sank in the water. Richard Owen suggested that young Francis move to London and enroll at St. George's Hospital to become accustomed to the sight of dissection. Francis arrived in London in 1847. Francis sought out men who were involved in the collection of unusual animals: fishermen, bug killers, taxidermists, and rat catchers. Francis bought sailors' pets at the docks. He became friends with the French giant, Joseph Brice. At 7 feet and 6 inches tall, he could light his cigars off the gas lights in the streets of Victorian London. In 1849, due to his heavy workload as Dean of Westminster, Francis' father, Reverend William Buckland, lost his mind. He became incapable of making even simple decisions, and was forced to retire. Wanting nothing more to do with natural history, he passed his days browsing through pictures in popular magazines. A great problem facing the London medical schools was the supply of bodies for dissection. They came mainly from workhouses and cost up to £10. There was no such problem in Paris, where a cholera epidemic was providing cheap corpses for the medical colleges. So Francis left to study abroad.
Oh, you got to buy a ticket for your dog.
Francis was unable to convince the booking clerk that his pet monkey, Jacko, was not a dog. Confounded, Francis produced a tortoise from his pocket and showed it to the clerk. Francis asked what the charge was to transport it.
No charge for them, sir, them be insects.
In Paris, Francis learned how to speak French and amputate limbs. He visited a horse slaughterhouse and the Jardin des Plantes, which contained a zoo and natural history museum. The Jardin later inspired the mysterious world of Henri Rousseau's great tropical paintings. Buckland returned to London and his work at the hospital. Hospital conditions were primitive. Anesthetics were rarely used. Surgeons wore blood-encrusted coats and carried a length of cord in their pockets, used to tie off arteries. Most patients who survived the operating table died of infection. The most common operation Francis would perform was an amputation. Hospitals usually smelled of feces, gangrene, and blood. Francis was appointed a house surgeon in 1852 and resigned in 1853. He met a coachman's daughter, Hannah Paps, and she bore him a son. They married. Francis had trouble finding employment until he joined the Life Guards, the senior regiment of the British Army, in 1854. The field days often took place in an open space in the west of London, Wormwood Scrubs. Here, Francis loved to watch the murmurations of starlings, and as the men unwrapped their sandwiches, he would watch the rooks appear. Francis was popular with the men. In one incident, they brought him a box containing a strange-looking skeleton. They told him that it was the skeleton of King Charles I's favorite parrot. Francis knew instantly that it was a rearranged rabbit skeleton, and that the men were playing a prank on him. He loved it, and kept the skeleton on display in his private museum until his death. Francis began lecturing on natural history, largely to audiences of working men. His lectures dealt mostly with novel details of the natural world, such as the mechanism by which an aquatic snail can burrow into a dock, the purpose of a lion's whiskers, and whether or not fish sleep. In 1856, his son died, and shortly thereafter his father, Reverend Buckland, passed away in Francis' arms. Francis observed as his colleagues performed an autopsy on his father. His father had suffered from melancholia, but died from a rare tubercular infection in his upper vertebrae. Francis gave his father's diseased vertebrae to a museum. The geologist Reverend William Buckland was buried in limestone. Some of his father's estate went to the University of Oxford, but many unique pieces were sold off at auction, including Billy, his father's stuffed hyena. As a child, Francis had hand-fed cake to a then-living Billy. To Francis, the collection was his father's autobiography. Each piece represented a trip to the country or a meeting with a colleague. The work of a lifetime was dispersed. On November 29, 1857, Francis' mother, Mary, spent the day examining marine sponges with a microscope. On November 30th, she was dead.
Englishmen always connect food with their researches into natural history.
To a lover of natural history, it was a pleasant sight to see him at dinner with the chicken before him, Charles Lloyd commented. To watch the scrupulous delicacy with which he removed the leg out of the socket, or examined, after very careful picking, the numerous troublesome little bones which constitute the pinion, and finally to hang over him as he performed a postprandial examination of the head, and then see how, undeterred by foolish prejudices, he devoured the brain.
There are nearly 4 million mouths in London to be fed daily. At present, this daily supply is forthcoming, but how long this is to continue without falling off is a question that makes me shudder.
Francis researched many animals by eating them. England was suffering a series of food shortages. Meat was expensive, and Europe was only just finding relief after the potato blight. It was in this context that Buckland set up the London chapter of the Acclimatization Society to find new sources of what he called food for the people. They intended to find species of plants and animals from other continents and transplant them into the English countryside. From Africa, they introduced the eland due to its high rate of reproduction.
The eland is the world's largest antelope, weighing as much as 1,200 pounds. It can jump an 8-foot fence in one hop.
Buckland tasted an eland in 1859 at the London Tavern. Everyone in attendance agreed that the taste had something in common with a pheasant. A few herds were established on British estates, but the eland was a failure. It proved inferior to cattle based on its space requirements and violent social hierarchy. The society next considered introducing the capybara.
The largest rodent in the world strongly tempts the domesticator. It swims like the beaver and feeds on water weeds, thus converting into wholesome nutriment vegetable substances which are turned to no account. It is very prolific and produces a great quantity of meat in a very short space of time.
The capybara was never introduced. The society tasted many animals, but successfully introduced none. They were publicly ridiculed. A branch of the Acclimatization Society was also started in Australia. This chapter was responsible for the introduction of the European rabbit. While Francis ran the society, he continued to lecture, published articles, and edited a popular journal. He was appointed as a fisheries inspector and was proud to care for God's wonderful works. Francis labored tirelessly on his fish museums, where he displayed unusual marine specimens and plaster casts of fish. These museums were only moderately attended. His fish museums failed to deliver the wonder of marine life to the masses in the manner Francis desired.
There's a natural curiosity that occasionally turns up in London in the shape of a mermaid, and I have been lucky enough to have seen this monster of the deep. The creature, a gentleman, not a lady specimen of the tribe, was from 3 to 4 feet long. The upper part of its body was composed of the head, arms, and trunk of a monkey, and the lower part of a fish. The head was really a wonderful composition. The forehead was wrinkled into a frown, and the mouth grinned a ghastly grin. The eyes, sunk deep in the sockets, are formed of round bits of leather, and altogether the features of the merman are those of an old man who is trying to laugh. I lost no time the morning after my arrival in Brighton in getting down to the seaside and listening once more to the ocean's solemn and never-ceasing song of praise to the great Creator.
His last public project, in 1869, was the construction of an aquaria in Brighton. He moved quickly to get it built. He let an old dispute with his greatest enemy, Francis pass away in silence. Brighton Aquarium opened on August 12, 1872, combining public instruction and amusement with scientific investigation. Described as a temple of the muses, scientifically and artistically. Francis had let nature communicate its own sensational contrasts.
Thus we see in the works of the benevolent Creator, wheel within wheel, nothing lost, nothing allowed to decay, all working together with an admirable and designed order.
Buckland enjoyed the feeling of being soaked through, and often went underdressed into the field. He found it a nuisance to handle nature with anything but bare hands. But this constant wet and cold had an effect on his health. He took ill after getting caught in a snowstorm during a crab and lobster inquiry for the fisheries. Soon after, dropsy set in, and Francis began to drown in his own body as it filled with water.
God is so good, so very good to the little fishes. I do not believe He would let their inspector suffer shipwreck at last.
Two days after his 54th birthday, Francis was buried in the same grave as his long-dead son.
I'm going on a long journey, one where I think I shall see a great many curious animals. This journey I must go alone.
Oh, the storm is passing over. Hallelujah. 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 Oh, the storm is passing over. hallelujah. Courage, my soul, as we journey on. The night is dark, won't be very long, for the storm is passing over. Hallelujah. 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 Oh, the storm is passing over. Hallelujah. 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 Oh, the storm is passing over. Hallelujah. Courage, my soul, as we further go. The rolling sea, obey God's command. When Jesus spoke, peace, peace, be still. For the storm is passing over. Hallelujah.